Welcome, everybody, to How to Attract, Develop, and Keep Good People. I'm Tom Noser, founder of Fortune's Path, and I'm here today with four other terrific entrepreneurs. And I want to introduce them as we go through the program, and you will get a chance to meet them as they answer questions. But we're going to be talking about how to attract, develop, and keep great people. And so I'm going to start off by asking my friend Ben a question about whether or not hiring is working. So Ben, you've been writing a newsletter about hiring. Tell us what is working and not working in hiring today.
Oh, wow. I'll try to keep this short. I think it's working on a bare minimum. People are getting jobs. People are able to fill open roles sometimes. I think like the general idea is pretty well understood. I think what's not working is I think we're really bad allocators of resources if you think of people as resources. So I think we're as a society, we're not great at getting the right butts in the right seats. And I think that, there's a lot of improvements we can do there. I also think that, no one takes a class in how to hire or evaluate talent. If you look at the SHRM designation and you look at the curriculum they put together, there's actually nothing even for HR leaders on how to best identify and place talent. So I think we've really missed the mark there. And I think that's starting to show up, and particularly in the US and capitalistic societies with the lack of talent. So for the first time ever, as of last fall, the US working population is no longer growing. So we no longer have this environment of abundance, and instead we have an environment of scarcity. And we're incredibly ill prepared for it.
So Andrew, you are the CEO of a healthcare tech company. Are you struggling to attract talent?
Depends on what role.
Okay.
A lot of people for certain roles and deficient in others. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm struggling because if you put an ad out on Indeed, they will make sure that you get a ton of candidates. So depending on the role, we're a little deficient. I wouldn't say struggling. So I'm unfortunate with some of the recent hires that we brought on board.
What are some of those roles that you're struck that might be a little deficient?
I would say the customer success roles. Some of the people, again, going back to, we had a pre-conversation before we officially started around just people doing really well in interviews, but like that interview not translating into job performance. So the specific task that we have our customer success doing is more of a combination of inside and outside, like a little bit of sales and service, which is a unique thing that I don't think most customer success roles have. And so it's hiring for specific characteristics, like integrity, because you're going to be out in the field and no one's going to be watching you. So I like to ask questions like, what do your enemies say about you? Like it gets people's mind well, I've never asked that question before, right? And I just want to see how they respond. So,
Carm, do you have favorite questions that you ask in interviews? I like that one about what do your enemies say? Do you have favorite questions?
The thing I love to dig into is the why. Why do you do what you do?
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to spend a third of your life working. What's the why? What gets you up in the morning? And you really want to read the person's reactions. If they're kind of flat, if they're not really excited about the job or what they've done.
Right.
And
now you've founded multiple companies. This isn't your first rodeo.
True.
And the first one you said was about being 16 years old and bringing the internet to the masses. You were a web hoster. Why did you found that business?
Well, it was really Tom. And Tom, I think you're sharing your wrong screen. I'm going to answer this. Well, maybe you fix that.
I'm about to chime in as your marketing person. We got to This is why my blood pressure's up here.
I need to hire someone to do my tech for me. Thank you for chiming in there. I hope this is better. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was the late 90s, and you know, it was the right time. My friend and I, my really good friend, you know, I'd say best friend, you know, he was we were both in our teens, and it was the late 90s, and you know, the internet was taking off and we loved it. We had, you know, a couple computers between each other, and we saw the hosting world kind of take off. And so we started doing a hosting business and doing web page design and things like that. It was a very, you know, it was a high school business. It was in a basement. It was 5 of us.
But you didn't go through any kind of a hiring process for those 5 people. How did you, how were they attracted to you?
It was just friends. I mean, we literally, it was typical like startup stuff where there wasn't an interview. It was like, hey, you like computers, I like computers, you know, and you're curious about the internet, let's go do something fun together. And so
is that a reasonable way to start a business? I mean,
no. And you know, I'd say I lost some friends through that process, because we had people kind of come through and you know, luckily, you know, my core friend I started that with, we're still lifelong friends, and we've been through everything together. We actually started another company together many years later. And so, you know, I think that you really have to learn, you know, a lot of this is trial by fire. You know, I think for most early stage entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in general, hiring and firing and finding fit is incredibly hard. And you know, the problem is, like, even if you go out and you go work at a big company, you're tended to be exposed to really bad cultures. You know, I think one of the things that's really interesting to pay attention to is, if you want to find a bad culture, find a lot of processes. So if you walk into
someone who runs a small business, right?
If you run into a company, right, and everything's process, you know, you know, everything is process oriented, they don't have a culture that empowers people to just do the right thing, right? If you have a bad culture, your replacement, the only thing you can do is tell people what to do and give them processes. If you walk into a big company, you know, this is like Office Space, the TPA reports, right? You know, it's all about process. There's no empowerment and nothing of, hey, these are the things that we believe, and this is how we empower you, and this is you know, the experience you get for working with us, and we expect you to just live up to these things. You just introduce process. So
Andrew, does LiveCheer, Andrew, have a set of business principles? Do you guys have a set, like a constitution or something that represents your values?
Yeah, so we got the ethos of respect, integrity, results, right? And I should have, respect, integrity, and results just sounded better at the time, but I should have started with integrity. So I really look for integrity first, but that's the company ethos for sure. It's interesting what Carm said, because we had a lot of processes before, but going back to like the culture, and then we'll touch on that. Like, we removed a lot of those processes, and so I'm hiring for people to just like, are you a good human being, right? Like, when no one's watching you, like that's who you truly are. And so I try to get to that in the interview processes with that respect, integrity, and results, with the specific questions that we ask during the process.
Okay, so that's I want to ask Ashley now a question I'll ask everybody, which is, what do you look for how do you know what you want when you're interviewing people? How do you know what you want?
I mean, just to double down on Carm's comment about process, if anyone looks at ClearStart, every single one of our clients, you're looking at 3 of them right now, you guys are all so different. The way that you all function is completely different. So there is no set process in the way that we work. We work the way that our clients like to work. That can be just mind-blowing to someone if they came into the company that they're looking for a process. They need that to be able to succeed. And so I need someone who can just take ownership over what they're doing. And like Andrew said, I need someone who can push something to the finish line without their hand being held, without a process in place. And they need to be able to define that process to be able to get to the finish line. I don't care how you get there, as long as we get to the finish line. So I'd say that's really the biggest thing for me when I'm talking to people.
Carm, what do you look for? How do you know what you want?
Well, we have 3 core cultural values. We call them the rule of 5s. And, you know, one of the things that I learned about culture, and maybe I'll tell just a really quick anecdote. In my last company, RX Review, we had all these sort of, you know, we had like 6 values, right? But we had one that was called Lucy Up, and it spoke to our first patient. We were bringing drug cost transparency to patients. And it was the first patient that was ever done, which was our chief medical officer's mother, who he analyzed her meds and saved her, you know, like $500 a month. And her name was Lucy. And so we started with Pony Up, but then someone was like Lucy Up. And what's interesting about those cultural values is you really want to create something highly memorable. And when someone hears it, they say, wait, what does that mean? Well, I don't understand that. Because now I could say things like, you know, we want smart, you know, we hire for smart.
Right.
You know, it doesn't mean anything, you know, and it's a story, right? It's a story that's tribal, right? It goes back to that thing of telling stories. And I will tell you, you know, it's out of hand. I still, you know, keep in touch with the company. They actually have like a monthly Lucy Up award that's like a WWF belt that they actually hand out an employee. And then what's been funny is that then the employee has this belt, and it actually has a picture of, you know, our CMO's mother on the belt. And so the joke is you get the belt and then you go somewhere and you take a picture, you know, either wearing the belt, holding the belt, and you post it as the Lucy Up award winner. But those are the things that really stick, you know, that when we think of, you know, one of the things that Credo is we have this 55 minutes thing is one of the rule of 5s. And it's 55 minutes is always have curiosity and question. And it goes to this thing about Einstein, who said, I'd rather spend 55 minutes thinking about the question and 5 minutes thinking about the answer. Because the questions are way more important than the answers typically. And we want to drive that. And then what's fun about that is I can in a meeting, I see someone who just went relentlessly pursued the question. And I said, hey, you know, I stop and I say, look, I just want to say, like, the way you showed up and you took 55 minutes on that, you really dug in. And you do that in a group setting, and then you're reinforcing that cultural value. So those are some of the, you know, things that we really focus on at Credo to help our people understand what we believe and what's important in terms of culture.
So Ben, one of the things that you're working to do is to help people quantify a hiring process to make it more accountable and transparent. So when somebody says, I look for traits, or we look for cultural fit, et cetera, what's your response to that? How do you keep that fair?
How do you keep it fair? Well, I think you have to define them, and you have to have confidence in that definition. So to go on Carm's point, you have to spend 55 minutes thinking about what do we value here before you come with your list. And I think the next thing is you have to figure out, how do you measure those values, right? So I agree with, like, a big part of your culture is what you celebrate. So like giving an award, right? Doing public praise for someone living up to a cultural value that may be a hard cultural value to live up to. Those are great things. But I think it starts with, okay, what do we actually value and how do we measure it, right? And because ultimately what I'm trying to do anyway in the interview process, and what many of my clients have really latched on to, is, it's one thing to ask the question to the candidate. It's another thing to actually score it. And what I mean by that isn't some top grading 450 page book, right, on like how you score it, but it's like, what are the things
that sounds like a process.
It's top grading is terrible. But what is your process for evaluating? Like, what are you actually looking for? So like, if I may, quick example, you know, all of us are involved in either startups, smaller companies, right? We're interested in growing and scaling them. We talked a lot about, are you doing the right thing when no one's looking? One of the traits, and I'm writing about it now, that I really value is self-accountability. And when I ask that question, right, I want a company full of people that can hold themselves accountable in absence of me, or absence of another.
That's what Ashley's saying.
Right. It's what Ashley, it's what everyone really wants, particularly sort of growing and starting a small business. And so, okay, you want people like that. Well, how do you actually measure it? Well, I want to make sure someone can diagnose a problem and then design systems for themselves,
right,
so that they can execute on the solution. So like, what do I mean by that? Well, I ask them, what's something that you want to that you've wanted to personally improve,
right,
you are personal or professional? Walk me through your thought process, right? And the best answers, the person seeks outside expertise. They like read a book, look at YouTube, go on TikTok. I don't really care, right? They like seek outside expertise. They create a social component. So they either get a community involved, they get someone else to hold them accountable. Maybe they like start a group, whatever it is. They use data to quantify their progress, which is, I'll admit, in my like, I'm more of a sales guy. So sales, that's a lot easier to do, but they use data. And then they can divorce the outcome from their effort. So sometimes you can do everything right and it blows up in your face.
Yeah.
Right. I could go do LeBron's training plan. I'm not going to play for the Warriors anytime soon. Right. So when going back to your question, like, I'm like, how do you do this? It's like, you have to think like very systematically, like what do I actually, like, what behaviors do I need to see? What kind of traits do I need to see? And like, what does good look like?
Yeah. Do you think, maybe Ashley, do you think you're good at hiring?
I haven't done it a ton, but I haven't fired a lot of people. So I think that also speaks to it. I have found people that, you know, really showed, I guess, the character traits, the culture that I was looking for. And Tom, I think I've told you this before, you know, back in the day when I launched ClearStart Creative, I had absolutely zero plans of ever growing my team. This was something that I thought was fun, that I could do.
Solopreneur.
It was me. If I brought someone else on, I'm just going to have to take on the burden of a paycheck, all of that, the stress of it. And my brother asked me one day, he said, well, if you hire someone else, are you going to do 2X or are you going to do 5X?
Right.
And I was just like, I have no idea, you know, what that is. But, you know, I think it speaks to, if you do find that right person, you can do 5X. And that's exactly what we saw once I brought someone else on to just support the efforts that I was doing. I was able to move into different roles. She was able to fill in gaps that I, you know, couldn't fulfill. And we were able to help out a lot more people. And so that was something that has always stuck with me. And I kind of, when I'm thinking about hiring someone, I always go back to that question. I was like, is
2X or 5X?
Yeah, the 2X.
How do you, Carm, you've had to build multiple teams. How do you know when someone's a 5X person?
Well, they surprise you. You know, I think that's one of they do stuff above and beyond, and they really take ownership. You know, I will tell you the inverse is when you sit around and think about how you could do the person's job on your team better, it's time to let them go. It's a very easy telemetry. If you're sitting there like, God, you know, why isn't this person doing this or that? Or I would do it, you know, I would do this, or I'd try that. And you're like going all over the place. You're taking your time, your brain space, and doing their job.
Now I'm gonna push back on that a bit. There's a lot of jobs I don't know how to do. Like, we got somebody building a porch, and I'll see them put things together, and I'm like, why are they doing it that way? You know, it's like, but if I'd be really up a creek if I decided I could build a porch better than they could. I mean, well, Andrew, are you a developer, Andrew? Have you done technology?
Self-taught programmer. I'm no longer writing code any longer, but self-taught.
Do you depend upon that when you're evaluating tech talent?
No, I completely outsource that to my product principal software engineer. I don't assess the technical talent because we'll be up a creek as well. So
when you hear
an ocean,
when you hear Carm say, you know, I feel like I could do their job better than they could, what sorts of jobs are you comfortable feeling like that about?
Anything business development, sales, most things on the business side, but particularly business development, sales. And so, but I also know where I'm weak at. And so I have really like recently just said, hey, like, let me own all the business development, and then like the implementation and operations, that's like now being tasked to someone else, because I'm not like really good at the implementation and the processes. So it's good to know like what job you think you can do better than someone else, but it also is it's imperative that you're honest with yourself and say what you can't do well. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, to push back a little bit though, you don't have to be a pro in something to know that something's not getting done well.
That's true.
And if you're not receiving results from someone, it's like, I'll, bring someone on, a developer, someone like that, someone is supposed to be, a better designer than I am, whatever it is.
Right.
And it's not getting done. It's not, things aren't getting accomplished. And, 100%. That's where, these people, I will never use them again. Right. But I don't have to be the pro in it to know that, results aren't being delivered.
Oh no. So I can hold people accountable for the results for sure. But sometimes like, if this feature was supposed to take 10 hours or 30 hours, like that's really hard to assess. Right. So there are certain like acumen things or specific like skill sets, like the technical skill sets that like you really can't judge, but you can develop you can judge the output, right?
Right. So I would say, Carm, I would say that positive surprise absolutely is like, oh, this is wonderful. I never would have done it this way. I wouldn't have thought it this way. And then there's disappointment. So something comes back and you're like, I'm just really disappointed. So go ahead.
You tend to hold an outcome in your head, right? Either spoken or unspoken that you've either agreed or not agreed to. And I would argue you need to be very clear about, having a little bit of inquiry with who you're working with to know, okay, we're aligned in outcome and, this is our expectations, which a lot of time companies just miss. They just sort of, go off and do something. Yeah. When you see excellence, right, is that outcome in your head that you were holding on to is far exceeded, right?
Yes.
Like, oh my gosh, they just, they went, 10 times further than I would have ever thought of going in terms of that outcome that I had in my head. And then it's just, how much, when it's bad, it's how much are they falling below that? And I think you can lead, with a lot of inquiry to see how someone really when they're in it, right? Like just asking a bunch of questions, you can very quickly see if the person's engaged in thinking about the problems and outcomes they're pursuing and how they're working through them in their head. Right. And inquiry is a great way to uncover that if person's really committed and excited about the work that they're engaged in to get the outcomes that you're both looking for.
So I want to talk a little bit about a philosophical dilemma, because those are my favorite things to talk about. The Constitution guarantees us all freedom of association. And so as private organizations, we're allowed to choose who we associate with. How do we balance that with freedom of access, where people have an opportunity to work and better themselves, have an opportunity to rise above the group that they were born into? Or you could also say, is that even possible anymore? Essentially, is everybody just a closed club? And so I'm going to start with Ben, because he's the guy I know the best, and so I can lean on him. Ben, how do we balance our right to choose who we associate with the necessity of having an open society?
Man, Tom.
I'm glad you went first, Ben.
I agree on that.
So when you talk about this concept of free association, right? We have a right of free association, but and yes, like we live in a society that prizes access and believes in a meritocracy, right? And you can make arguments that we are very good or very bad at that. So when we talk about free association, like to me, it starts with, what are you trying to accomplish, right? If I'm trying to be a faster mountain biker. I'm going to seek out people who ride faster than I do, right? If I am building a business, my core responsibility to myself and the investors I have and my employees is as a fiduciary, right? So association is about performance, period. Period. And if you believe, as I do, that like diversity of thought, like helps you perform better as an organization, then the access takes care of itself. Right. So this isn't like, and it's really easy to fall into this trap of like, I want to hire my friends and I hire people I want to hang out with. No, you don't. If you hire, you are a bad fiduciary to yourself and your investors. Period. I'm sorry.
I love that idea. That's a fantastic answer. I love that idea of the association in a business is about profit. So this is kind of the Milton Friedman thing of saying that the highest purpose of any business is to achieve a profit for its shareholders. And there's a lot of pushback on that concept now of saying that, well, no, we have a lot of other obligations because businesses are instruments for the public good, or can be. But you're saying that, well, if I make my highest goal performance, I have an obligation to surround myself who can better that performance regardless of my affinity for them. So I'm going to go to Andrew. Your business to me is super interesting about getting access to healthcare to a population which has previously distrusted the authorities in healthcare. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you're trying to bring in a population which has previously opted out of the healthcare system by establishing trust?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you didn't have me answer that last question. But I'm happy to opine on it.
Please do.
Yeah, I think so. Ben said a couple things that I agree with wholeheartedly. So diversity of thought is important, right? So as an African American man, it's easy in our culture to get stuck in our own little milieus. And I think whatever ethnicity you are, like being in a homogenous group is not. I just don't think it's helpful. It's not fruitful. Because basically you're just in an echo chamber, right? And so diversity of thought, I actually prioritize that over like, people that look and have the same culture and diction than I do, right? So I think that's very important. I do believe people should be able to associate with whoever they want to associate with, but all beliefs have consequences and ramifications. So like, that's just like, I can elaborate on that, but
please.
No, it's all right.
No, I mean, I'll say, I feel like there's entire ways of thinking, ways of knowing, ways of living I know nothing about. There's a phrase I love, one of my favorite writers. He says there's more difference between a man and a man than between a man and a donkey. And to me, it's like that goes to that diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of perspective.
Yeah, I think it's funny that we have this pushback against diversity. I actually find it kind of strange because if a business is about solving problems and producing products and services that consumers will buy, right? You would want the broadest set of abilities to solve problems and figure out how to do something. The way you achieve that is through diversity. Because someone's background and experience and the culture they come from, right, is so dramatically different, right, than what the next person who has a completely different background see how they see the world. And you really, this is where people, this sort of diversity for diversity's sake, it's not just that. And I've been, my first startup I worked out of college was in Boston. And, Boston is this because of the colleges, the vast colleges, university. It is the most extreme melting pot you've ever seen because they're sourcing, it's the highest density of colleges and universities in the world. And so they're sourcing all these people from all over the world. And then I got the opportunity to work with them all.
Mm-hmm.
And I really saw, so for in a firsthand way, in that first startup I worked for, because we were like, you know, your early startup days, you're problem solving constantly. And
Right.
it was fascinating to me sitting in these meetings and be like, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
You know, I just,
Yeah.
it's not even in my purview.
Yeah.
Because of, you know, I grew up in Western Massachusetts, and I was in a small town, and, you know, this was my life experience. And people really brought that diversity into the room. And then it just becomes this incredible sort of flywheel effect, in my opinion. And that's why I'm committed to it, because that's the environment I want to live in. I want like this diverse set of ideas and thoughts and problem solving capabilities from every which way I can pull it, because that gives me a higher chance of driving better performance, better outcomes, and better, you know, better financial results for the companies that I get to run. So, you know, that's why I think diversity is such an important thing that we can't sort of skip over and just say for the sake of diversity. You know, it really does make a demonstrable difference.
So Ashley, one of the my wife has talked to me about a dilemma that she's seen a lot in meetings, which is where a guy says something, or excuse me, a woman says something, a few minutes go by, a guy says the same thing, and then everybody goes, yeah, that's right. So there's an expectation in this idea of a diverse environment that you're going to have opinions. People are going to express opinions. There's going to be positive conflict. There's going to be kind of a electric environment. As a woman running and a mom and running a business, do you want an environment like that? Like, I'm sort of asking in a roundabout way, would you ever hire a guy?
So I've been sitting here thinking about this, and, you know, no one knows my team makeup outside of this probably, but it's myself, and I have 2 females under me. And then I have a few kind of part-time people actually talk about diversity. One of my graphic designers, I think he might be on this webinar watching right now. Hey, Rudy, he is in Slovenia. We couldn't be more opposite.
Yeah.
But he's been one of the most wonderful people that I brought onto my team to help me out. And so I do have a part-time male. I've worked with a few males. But one thing, you know, personally, I have not experienced kind of the mansplaining or, you know, anyone kind of coming in and reinforcing my idea with their own. Actually, it's been the opposite. I've been told that I have a very authoritative voice, and I get a lot of nods, I feel like, when I'm talking, and whether I know what I'm saying or not, I say it with all my belief. And so I think a lot of people will believe me too, for better or worse. But, you know, I have not necessarily experienced that. I love having a women run business. I think it's really cool. And the women that I work with are some of the hardest working women I've ever seen. And I think what's really neat too, and, you know, I actually have really sick kids as of today. And, you know, these women have stepped up and really helped me out and filled in where, you know, I really needed help. And it happens a lot. And so I get a lot of support from those people, but not to say that, you know, the men wouldn't do the same thing. All of you guys are awesome too, if there's ever, you know, something that comes up. But I think it is unique to have a mostly women run business. And let's just say they're the ones that have stuck around the longest. So.
I think that there's, that goes back to the freedom of association. Part of, like, a startup life is really, really stressful. And there's a certain sort of breed of person who likes that. And so you have to be free in your selection process and your attraction process to say, look, do you want to join this? Like, I'll just say, I think Elon Musk is a dirtbag, but he does have an interesting phrase where he says, if you're joining Tesla, you're making a specific choice to up your game. We're like special forces, which is the kind of dirtbag thing he would say. But I would say that the point he's making, though, is that there's a degree of self-selection here. And when you come, you have to be willing to live by our rules. And so, but this now we're getting back a little bit towards the quote, live by our rules. And are we now just heading into sorority land of they're just not our kind here? So I want to understand how we create structures, how we build, dare I say, processes, how we create structures that make sure we're not lying to ourselves, that make sure that when we look for these character traits, we do it in a accountable way. So Ben, I want you to tell the story about the interview you had with your candidate who you thought, I would never get a beer with this guy.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. So I was hiring very aggressively. This is, I guess, 2 summers ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I interviewed a guy, and I have a very set rubric that I use. I use same questions, same order. And usually it takes about 30 minutes. It took about 15 with this guy. I came out of the interview feeling like no way in hell. Like this guy and I did not click any which way whatsoever. We were very different personalities, had very different backgrounds. We were, he was a black dude, I'm a white dude. He went to Syracuse. I think New York's not, I don't like New York at all. Like it was just one of these, like we had nothing. What ended up happening though, is I looked at my rubric after the interview and the guy had scored second highest of all the candidates we had interviewed. We had been interviewed quite aggressively. So this is 20 plus candidates, and decided to hire him anyway. Kind of going back to first principles, like what do I actually prize? It's these traits. I don't prize how much I personally like someone. And he ended up doing really well. We promoted him really quickly. I was always blown away when I did call listenings on his sales call. It was like I was literally listening to a different person than the person I knew from a work context. And our one-on-ones turned into a joke. We joked about how different we were, right? And I had to learn how to manage and how to support. And frankly, I really grew to really love the guy. Someone who is like just so different from me that if we met at a party, it'd be like, hey, nice to meet you, see you later. And like that feeling was very mutual, right? And again, he's gone on to do some pretty great things. He started a couple of businesses since, really aggressive. If you met him, he does not strike you as the aggressive entrepreneur type, but Lord knows he can get after it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
you kept yourself honest with that set of rubrics. You had a scoring method. You had a standard set of questions that you asked, and you gave him a break because
I didn't give him anything.
Yeah, that's true. He scored well. He scored well. You didn't give him a break. Go ahead, Carm.
I kept myself honest.
By giving him the scoring.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ben. I listened to a company recently that during the pandemic, it's kind of a worldwide company, and they were experimenting with a lot of, because everything's remote and they couldn't interview in person. And one of the experiments that worked out really well, and I thought this was fascinating, is they moved to chat interviews.
Yeah, I love that.
So you had no voice, no video. You were just chatting with the person, and it removed, what was so interesting is it removed a bunch of bias. Yeah. And then, they eventually would meet the person and see their face and get to, hire them. But he said, we hired a bunch of people we wouldn't have because we didn't have the bias standing in our way. And it really worked out. He said, we ended up hiring these really, diverse, different quality talent. And I thought that was just such an interesting anecdote about how much, bias can live in sort of lining up somebody with our culture, and just because of their background and how they differ from us.
So yeah, Andrew, that's okay. You want to comment on that? Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I accidentally experienced that as well, which kind of formed the bedrock of some of my beliefs. Years ago, I was managing a product team, and we had to recruit thousands of contractors, and we had basically 2 months to do it. So there's no way we're going to interview them. There's no way that we're going to see their faces. We had sort of an ideal person in mind that we marketed to. And we ended up getting the number of contractors we needed, but I had an engineer on my team come up to me and say, "Hey, are you interested at all in the demographics of the people we now have on our platform?" It was a tech support, chat tech support platform. And I said, "Sure, yeah. I'm sure they're all like, 20-something-year-old dudes who are super into video games." Well, it turns out it was all 40-year-old former stay-at-home moms whose kids had gotten older and they wanted to economically contribute. Right.
Fantastic.
We had no idea who we were hiring. We only knew them as like their username. Right. And it was just like such this wake up call. Most of them lived in rural areas. Many of them had been dramatically affected by the Great Recession in 08 and 09. Right. And it was this totally different kind of person than we initially envisioned. Yeah. And yeah, I love that story about chats. Automatic, the company behind WordPress, Matt Mullenberg, he does chat interviews, and they're async. So you can literally be anywhere in the world. You have like 24 hours to respond.
Yeah, right. Writing letters to each other.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'll tell one other quick anecdote, and I'm sorry, I don't remember where I heard this, but it was on another podcast. This whole idea of like, you want a broad net because you never know where talent's going to come from, right?
Right.
So, if you think about it, hey, I want the best team in the world. Imagine a scenario, you are starting a soccer team and you and another person are given $10 million to go recruit that soccer team.
Yeah.
And then those teams are going to play together, and whoever loses, the other team, all the people die. Okay. So now the pressure's on, right?
That's right.
Now here's the one difference. One of the teams can only hire from where that person is located. And the other person can hire from wherever. Who's going to win?
Oh my gosh.
It's such a great, it just puts a fine point on that. You cannot and you should not narrow your view to Ben's point, right? I think let's go find a bunch of 22 kids, a bunch of kids out of college, right? No, that's not where the talent is. Right. And we hold on to these biases so strongly in our hiring and cultural processes. You never know. And that's why you want to always drive a broad, wide net and let everybody come in and then figure out based on culture, talent, skills, how they fit into your organization. But I love that story. I just thought it was wonderful.
That's cool. And Andrew, how do you, I'm sorry, Ashley, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Just real quick. You can see too where, the attempt to be diverse within your organization can be detrimental to the organization. So I don't think I haven't talked about how I actually found Meredith.
How'd you find her?
I was helping a VC fund. I did their marketing. And so we were hiring an internal junior marketing person. So I was part of the interview process. We interviewed a ton of people. And it actually came down to Meredith and this other male. And in my head, and I'm pretty sure most people's head, Meredith was by far the most qualified. She checked so many boxes, but the other candidate, he was okay. He was good. But he was a Black male. And in the organization, it was all white. And so it was actually pretty clear that they were really pushing for him to instill more diversity within the organization. And I didn't push back too much because one, it's not mine. And two, I was kind of thinking at the time I was going to hire someone anyway. So I'm just going to poach Meredith for myself. But it was just really interesting to kind of see someone that was hiring with just a checkbox. And it wasn't about bringing in diverse thoughts and experiences. It was more the location. And that just always stuck with me and really bothered me because I always thought, I could be Meredith in that interview process and be 100% the most qualified candidate. But because I didn't check that box, I wouldn't have gotten the job. And I understand the benefit of, having a diverse organization, but understanding what diversity means for your organization, I think is really key. And, he's no longer with the company. He didn't work out. And, it's just interesting. And Meredith is, the best thing that's ever happened to me. So
I was going to say, basically that company set them up for failure, right? So they didn't pick the best candidate just to pick the best candidate. They, like you said, pick someone to check a box, and now like who knows like the psychological effects of like what that meant to that person if like say he onboarded and got fired in 3 months, or then like thoughts are rummaging in his head like, okay, like why was I originally brought on, right? Was it to fill some quota? Which is one of just as a personal anecdote, or a personal like belief that I have is I just want my daughter, right, as an African American like woman to just be the best. And like she's just like, hey, my test scores are just better than you. Like I don't need I don't need like some grant, right? Like no, I'm better than you. I perform better, right? Like I do everything just better than you, regardless of your race or if you're a woman or whatever your pronouns are. No, I'm just better than you. So we should just like I just hire for the best people, but regardless of like their orientation or however they feel about certain things, right? That's where the respect, integrity, and results comes in, which is our company ethos. So
I want to tell a quick story, and then we got some couple of really good questions I want to get to. So MIT was among some of the league colleges who stopped accepting the SAT score. And they were doing that in an attempt to attract a more diverse group of candidates. Do you guys, I'm seeing some shaking heads. I think you all know what happened.
Yeah.
What happened was only the rich kids got in. When they stopped doing the SAT, you had to have a score that allowed people to prove that they were better. Otherwise, they couldn't break through. And so their intention was to have a more diverse student body. They actually ended up with less. And so they've gone back to having the SAT because they need some. And there's a lot of argument around whether or not those tests are unbiased, or you can also make a kind of a philosophical argument. Is it even possible to create an unbiased test of performance? But they did perform their intended task, which was to create a more diverse pool of candidates. So this is a question that I love it because it's a bit of a devil's advocate question. And Ashley, it's coming at you. But we can all answer it. So the question is, can having an all-female organization be considered diverse? A male-only company would not be considered diverse today. Is there a difference?
I think so, because for me, I go back to what traits do these people bring to the table, and is there a diverse set of traits?
Right.
And so I mean, it goes back to exactly there. I'm not looking at it as like we're all female. I think it's really cool to be all female because there's a lot of only female on this panel right now. I mean, there's the fact of the matter, there's way less women in business out there. So I do think that it's really we are slightly a minority in business. But once again, I'm not looking at, that they are a female, that they're white or whatever they are. I'm looking at what they bring to the table at the end of the day. So
I want to say one thing about that too, is
how you characterize diverse. Yeah.
I mean, we can talk about diversity of character, diversity of thought. Now, I do believe that we have a responsibility to pay for the sins of the fathers. And so what has happened in the past absolutely positively has a dramatic impact on the lives of people today who are innocents. And so I do think that to say it's like, well, if I had an all-male company, I would get accused of being biased and I get sued, blah, blah, blah. All-female company, and you get special loans from the government. What the hell is that? Okay, what that is a reflection of 250, 400, 2,000, however you want to count, years of unfairness. It's impossible to say that women have had the same opportunities, had the same rights, occupied the same positions as men over the course of civilization. And then to say, well, nobody's a sexist now, so we should all forget the past, is just stupid.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because like we don't forget like July 4th, like holidays. We don't say, oh, that happened 1776.
Right.
why are we celebrating it every year? Right? So like
Right.
it's easy for us to like celebrate the successes, but then like our blind spots and our foibles over the centuries, like we just ignore those. And I just wanted to, and I think you're getting at a point that I wanted to make. I think Ben said you used the word meritocracy earlier.
Yeah.
I don't. It's funny. My libertarian background, like I always believed in a meritocracy, but I do think it's kind of a myth. Because, for example, the MIT test scores example. Yeah. Well, if you come from a low income neighborhood, like unfortunately I grew up, you don't have the extra resources to put your kid in a SAT prep class. So if your kid starts SAT prep at 13, right? Mm-hmm. So they've been doing SAT prep for 4 or 5 years, right? Mm-hmm. And then the person that's in, the South Side of Chicago never gets SAT prep, doesn't even get like a workbook, but maybe like they have some like class once a week, that they can attend for 45 minutes. Like logically, like who do you think is going to score better on a test that honestly, like there's certain ways, and we probably all took the GMAT if you did MBA or like SAT, ACT, like there's certain ways and tactics that you only know how to answer questions if you take one of those courses. Yeah. So
no, man, it goes to, so one of the other question I want to get to from the audience was, have you ever had a candidate who wasn't necessarily qualified, but you had a gut feeling that they were a good person to bet on, and you ended up bringing them in, even though they were a little shaky?
I mean, I'll take that one. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think I think Ben's story earlier is a really good one in that, and this is why group hiring really matters. Like you shouldn't just have a single person ever hiring somebody into the company. People can have bad days. People can interview poorly. I remember one distinct interview where it was a female candidate. I went in, the interview did not go well, in my opinion. I came out no way. I had 2 other people on the team who, one was their manager too. And we had this sort of thing that if you were really excited, you could kind of almost override the group. Like we wanted one person who was really excited about hiring the person. It's a good indicator if you're onto a good candidate. And her potential manager was very excited about her. And so was one other person on the team. And I said, okay, I said, you're going to have to manage her. So, it's your choice. And she had just bombed the interview with me. Right. And so I had very low expectation, and she excelled beyond, it was incredible what she did within the organization. She was one of our best employees, I'd argue, at the end of the day. So, I think that's very common. Look, this is also the argument of like spending like the fact that we like take an hour maybe, or even 2 hours, and like try to get telemetry on how good a candidate it is, or how good some employee that's going to work with us for years. It's very hard. I mean, there's a lot of arguments out there that say you should spend huge amounts of time, lots and lots of effort to sort of figure out, because one bad candidate or employee can be a big issue. But I think it's very common. It goes both directions. You can hire someone you don't think is that good that ends up excelling, and the inverse as well, right? So this is what the hard part is about figuring this out in a very short window of time to actually get to know somebody and know that they're a good fit.
I mean, if you had looked at my resume for the very first job real job that I'd interviewed for, it was a healthcare startup in Nashville. I honestly don't think that the founder read my resume, which they thought I was not qualified for the job at all. But I think he did. I mean, he led with a lot of gut, and it ended up obviously being a great hire. That was fantastic. But it went incredibly well, and he didn't go off of my merit. And it was interesting, after that company, that's when I really wanted to get more into a marketing role, really focus on that. And this is a story I don't think I've really told many people, but the company I knew wasn't going to make it. And so I was interviewing at a bunch of different companies throughout Nashville for these marketing roles. And I kept making it down to the final two. And then they would choose someone else because they were more qualified than I was. It probably happened at like 4 or 5 different companies. And I mean, I've never felt more defeated in my entire life. And then that's when I literally said, fuck it, I'm going to start my own company. And so I did. And it's been the best thing I've ever done in my entire life. And now I am, beyond qualified, for any of those roles that I, those more junior marketing roles I would have been, brought on for. And so it's just, I truly do not believe that, what someone has down on their resume paper really means all that much. I mean, I've told everyone this, I have a kinesiology degree. So truly my resume is trash for what I do. But, I was extremely dedicated. I saw a problem within these industries, small businesses, startups needed marketing help. And they needed someone that could come in and be a partner with them. And so that's really the model of my company, and it worked. And so there's my one plug for myself, but yeah, I mean, it was just, I truly believe that, what you have on paper is not going to always display into how they perform in their role.
It's just, it's hygiene, right? It's like, oh, okay, great. You walked out today and you put on deodorant. Like, okay, like, great. You don't get a pat on the back because you passed all your classes in college. Like,
right.
Well, that's what you were sent there to do, right? Like,
That's
right. And so that's, so just wanted to add that comment.
I like that. I hate resume reading. I just, I love that idea of it's hygiene. It's proof that I put on my deodorant. So I want to quickly go around and give everybody a chance to talk about things that have worked for them in the hiring process. So I'm going to start off just to kind of show an example, and this will bring the audience home with some practical takeaways. So I also ask some of the same questions in interviews. One of the questions I ask is, if you had to eliminate a state, which one would it be and why? And I ask the candidate to think out loud because I'm trying to observe their problem-solving process. I want them to understand that that's a badly formed problem. And I want them to try to ask questions to clarify what that means. So, and it gives me a chance to see how someone approaches a problem. So asking the same questions in interviews over and over, I think, again, is really helpful. I also interview for character over ability. I personally think that who you are in your character is much more important than what you can do today. Skills are continually changing, and they should be evolving. So I'm not that concerned about, so I don't really give a crap about your previous experience. It can be helpful sometimes. Like, I think when I'm hiring product managers, I love to look for people who've started businesses and had, or at least have an entrepreneurial streak, because I think that's very important to product managers. Ben, when you hire, what do you look, how do you ask, what's your process? What works for you? What are your tips and tricks?
So this is related to that question that we just asked from the audience, but I think a really good place to start is if your gut or your intuition is telling you something, it's really good to ask yourself why. And you may not always get, if you can look at it objectively, you're not always going to get a really good answer. And you may not like the answer you get. So I think the first thing is start examining your gut and your intuition. Start there and really tear it apart if you can. Really go several layers deep. I think the next thing, and I talk about this a lot with traits, skills are really easy to measure in a work assessment, right? Someone can build a revenue model or they can't. Someone can code in Python or they can't. If those are key skills, you should absolutely do them. I think the harder thing is determining the traits you need. And the way to do that is to go out and talk to people that are smarter than you and have hired more people than you and have been successful hiring those people, figure out what traits they look for, and then just experiment and iterate on it time and time again. I think one of the reasons I got into this is I started looking at hiring like I was a product person. And the problem of evaluating talent is as if I was a product person. And I was pretty disappointed at the current state of the market, and I knew I could do better. Right. So I think it's don't be afraid to iterate. Don't be get some abstraction between you and your feelings and your process. And don't be afraid to experiment and iterate.
Andrew, how about you?
So I like to ask two questions that are very atypical and almost like heretical in the interview process. What would your enemy say about you? Because one, it allows me to glean insights on like how they think about themselves. So that's number one. And then what books are you currently reading? And I don't just ask them for like the title, like, okay, so tell me what did you actually learn? And it trips people up, right? Because this is like an honesty test. Like I asked this one guy, was the engineering person, like, yeah, he's like said a book. And he's like, yeah, I'm reading this book. I was like, yeah, okay. So tell me like what the last chapter talk about, or what was your intake? What was your perspective on it? He's like, oh, it's been so long since I read the book. And it's like well,
why'd you mention it?
Yeah. It's like mention it. So like nothing was interesting. So again, like testing for the integrity and the honesty and like those intangibles that are not hygiene is very important to me.
Ashley, how about you?
Well, I mean, being, the authority within my company, I don't have a group I can lean on to, have other people interview. It's really me. And so I can send someone to you, Andrew. You can test them out for me. So, that's where I do. I mean, there is a lot of stuff that we have to, you have to be able to write a blog. You have to be able to do that. But like I said, I didn't really care as much about what the blog looked like. It was about how they, went about their process. So I do have to, throw in some different tests, things like that, to be able to kind of quantify not only their abilities, but also just how they approach problems. But, it's interesting in that first startup job that I had, the founder, they hired me, and then he told me that there was like a 60-day kind of trial period or probation period, I don't know. And I remember getting so offended with that and being like, well, you hired me, like, why would you now want to fire me after 60 days? And I think it was more of, this is a startup, we're just making sure that this is the right thing for both of us. And I don't, strictly enforce that, but I always kind of keep that in the back of my head to just kind of be thinking about, like, in those first 60 days, figuring out, how we're working out together. Because, there's only so much you can learn through interviews, and it's just me. So we have to kind of see how things are going after the hiring process to make sure it's still working for both of us. And so just making sure that I'm touching base with whoever I've brought on to make sure that this is still a fruitful partnership. Because it's just me. So, but I also want them to be equally happy because that's what's going to make us successful as a team.
Yeah.
Carm, it doesn't really end at the hiring, honestly.
Carm, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, I'll leave, some of my favorite questions, which is, why have you done what you've done, and why do you want this job? And I think the most important thing to watch is the reaction. And it really is getting into, why does someone get up every day and do what they do? And how motivated are they in that role? Because that's really, I live in the land of startups, and you want these people that are incredibly motivated and passionate about the work that they do. And do they really care about their career? Right? Do they really want to show up and invest in their career and grow? And are they not working, not only at the job to be done, but themselves in growing as an individual through their career? And I think that is one way of uncovering those types of characteristics with a relatively simple question.
I'm always amazed at how many people bomb the question, why do you want the job?
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. I remember I was struggling to find work when I was first married. And I went down the street to a restaurant, and I interviewed with them to be a waiter. And the guy said, well, why do you want to be a waiter? I said, because I need the money. And he said, well, that's not the answer we look for usually. And he said, but he gave me a decent response. He said, if you're interested in the hospitality industry, which I thought was this really pompous phrase because I was a snot. he said, go work for somebody like Ruby Tuesdays. They have a really good training program and you can learn about it. So I would say bombing an interview can be a real gift. Is a phrase I like. Rejection is God's protection. And there have been a lot of instances where I was protected against my will. I'm so grateful that you guys were here today with me, and I really appreciate everybody who joined in the audience. And so really quick before can you guys tell us your businesses? So if they want to get in touch with you, and I know we're at the very end, they want to get in touch with you, they want to learn more about what you do. Can you tell us just briefly how they can get in touch with you, and also a little bit about what you do? Carm, you want to start?
Sure. The company's Credo at credohealth.com. We do automated medical record retrieval. So really helping patients and providers and payers get the records they need so they can better take care of patients.
Ben?
Yeah, I have a small consulting company where I basically serve as a fractional CRO type to lots of companies that are, everywhere from C to kind of Series B, Series C. And I write about hiring practices. I'm a weekly newsletter, Lying to Ourselves.
Andrew?
Yeah, so Live Chair Health is outsourced community engagement and activation for managed care organizations. And so we leverage the unique social space of grooming hubs and non-grooming hubs and community liaisons to drive better healthcare outcomes for the underserved ethnic minority populations.
Ashley?
Founder of Clear Start Creative. I provide a breadth of marketing services to startups and usually investment firms is kind of the world we live in. We come in, we are your marketing partner, get really in the weeds with you and help you with wherever you need help. And you're looking at a lot of my clients right here on this call, which is kind of I'm actually on a webinar now. I make every one of my clients do webinars, and now I'm karma. So I'm here.
This was fun. I mean, this is near and dear to my heart. We're hiring at an exponential rate over the next couple months, given that we're closing around. So honestly, selfishly, I wanted to just learn from some of the other panelists and get some insights and take them back to the desk. So,
well, I think Live Chair's got a really cool mission. So I hope people are listening and that they reach out to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.